Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of An Ongoing and Necessary Pursuit. I'm your host, Jack Materko. Our guest this week, Rabbi Adam Bellows from Temple Israel in West Lafayette, Indiana. We have a really good talk about these interesting little intersections between what contemporary Satanism is doing and Reform Judaism, and how we're both navigating the attempts at turning America into a Christian theocracy. Oh, okay, so we have some really good talk there. I know some of you are probably hoping that we can touch on Israel-Palestine stuff. I'm going to warn you, we don't even get that far. We don't even make it out of the States. We'll get to Israel-Palestine next time we have the rabbi on, because he said he'd come back, and we'll get that one in the works. But we have some other good episodes coming up too. But first, I just have to tell you how you can help keep this show running. Of course, you can go to patreon.com/jackmaturko and become a subscriber and patron of the show. There's some special free stuff we're going to start giving out there as soon as we start getting some subscribers. We just set that up, so that one's new. Also, of course, subscribe on this channel and watch the YouTube videos and shorts and stuff, because that'll help make this hopefully be able to monetize one day. And of course, you can go over and check out my author page on Amazon, where you can check out any of my many offerings. You can check out my books. I really appreciate that. That really helps keep things moving along around here too. That's my pitch. Rabbi, how are you?
Doing well, Jack. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay. Why don't you go ahead and give everybody a brief primer on who you are and what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah. So my name is Rabbi Adam Bellows. I am in West Lafayette, Indiana. I'm originally from the Chicago area, and I am somebody who has believed for a long time in the goodness of everybody and the importance for fighting for social justice and religious pluralism. And I happened to bump into somebody that I know you work with, Riley Phoebus, I believe.
Yeah.
And we got to talking, and she invited me to come and join you. And I think that I've been a fan of what I've heard, and I'm not an expert, but I'm a fan of what I've heard over the past few years of the efforts of the Satanic Temple in America of trying to kind of point out the hypocrisy of maybe government entities favoring Christian groups over non-Christian groups in America, such as putting up the Ten Commandments at a courthouse or something like that. And so I think there are a lot of places that we can find common ground.
Right. And for everybody who maybe isn't particularly familiar with Reform Judaism, what's separating Reform Judaism from
Like Orthodox Judaism. So
Orthodox
yeah.
Judaism, or yeah.
Yeah. So in America, there's like three main streams of Judaism, and they're smaller streams as well. So there's mainly Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Judaism. Reform Judaism considers ourselves to be more focused on the spirit of a lot of Jewish laws and the spirit of Jewish holidays and Jewish beliefs, less focused on the tiny details and nitty-gritty of making sure we're following every bit of Jewish law to a T, but more using the wealth of Jewish tradition and Jewish holy scriptures to try to figure out how to make the world a better place. The Reform movement as a whole tends to be left-leaning sociopolitically, and is very focused on social justice issues such as racial equality, racial equity, racial justice, economic justice, fighting for LGBTQ rights, being strong feminists and egalitarians, as well as really fighting for religious separation between like church and state.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's one of
dividing the
the
state.
when I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania, and you know we had a lot I had a lot of secular Jewish friends who moved there from New York or whatever,
Mhm.
and it always struck me as uh, very much uh, an interesting thing about Reform Judaism, where you know it's not particularly picky on talking about the belief in God, and very much more a focus on the tradition and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody comes to
Whether
me
or
and says
not,
they want to be Jewish, if somebody comes to me and says they want to be Jewish, I'm not spending very much time. I mean, yes, I literally just had a meeting with somebody who's studying to become Jewish, and we talked about the Jewish belief in God. But uh, I won't ever tell somebody that they must believe in God or how to believe in God. For me, I can't help it. It's in my bones. God is there for me. But to me, that's not the point. The point is being a good person and making this world a better place for us and for everybody else.
yeah, and
And
part of that is that there is that kind of interesting overlap between Judaism as a religion and Judaism as an ethnicity, where I know plenty of people who are ethnically Jewish but very, very atheist.
well, and that's where it's not really accurate to say we're a religion or we're a faith group. We are a people. And so that can include religious belief, but you have 100 Jews in the room, you have 101 opinions on even like,
Sure.
even how to do certain things. But bringing in also there's the culture. For some Jews, you have the genetic history, but people can become Jewish. And if you become Jewish, you become part of the people. You are just as much part of our history and future as any other Jew. Like you are a Jew, that becomes your ethnicity.
Sure, because it's not the your view of Old Testament stories isn't necessarily literal truth anyway, right?
So that's even where like specifically Reform rabbis will not look at the Old Testament as literal truth or account of what happened. So what I usually say, and I mean, anybody who sat down with me for Torah study has heard me say this 1,000 times. So there's a couple things that I say. Number one is that there's a difference between our history and our story.
Mm.
Um, our story may not have, may not hold up to historicity as having any evidence to support that it's happened. Archaeological evidence, extra biblical evidence, any sources outside, the Torah, the five books of Moses. Um, but that doesn't make it any less meaningful to me. Like, there was a early Jewish thinker named Ahad Ha'am who said, "I don't know if the Exodus from Egypt actually happened, but I know I was there."
Mm.
So, right, so like, whereas like if you talk to religious fundamentalists of any faith or any Judeo-Christian faith at least, or even not just Judeo, any Abrahamic faith, let's say that. Um, if you're talking to a religious fundamentalist, they're often going to be spending time trying to, you know, prove and argue that certain things in their holy scripture happened. And,
Yeah.
um, most even like American Jews, even like conservative Jews, which would be like a step to the right of Reform Jews, we're not so focused on that. We're more focused on like what are the lessons that we take from this. Now, I find great meaning in trying to learn about who the people were who wrote these things down
Hmm.
that eventually became the Holy Scripture, like that eventually became the Torah. Like most Reform rabbis would not subscribe to the belief that like God gave Moses the entire Old Testament or the entire Torah on top of Mount Sinai and one thing and boom, word for word, boom. Rather, I look at it as a document that came together organically over thousands of years that includes many different traditions, many different oral stories, oral histories, and, you know, came together and eventually became what we call the Torah. And people often forget anyway that it wasn't the practice in the ancient Near East thousands of years ago. It wasn't the practice to try to write down historically what actually happened, like as close to that as possible.
Hmm.
Like that wasn't what historiography was back then. That didn't start, that was a later idea. And so to the people who wrote things down that became the Torah or the New Testament,
Hmm.
even, there wasn't this modern idea of history versus story, of real versus fake, of fiction versus nonfiction. It was all one and the same.
Yeah, well, and I think, prior to those things being written down, a lot it was oral tradition, and storytelling is effective. My weird little comparison in my head has always been, we have Beowulf, which is probably started out of this story of one time a guy killed a bear, and it just kind of extrapolated out from there.
Right. Every time grandpa told it around the story, it became a
Yeah,
bigger
it
and
gets a
bigger
little
bear.
different and it changes a bit, and
Yeah.
I so the interesting thing to me in terms of uh Satanism friendly uh Judaism
Yeah.
is is how those stories, how our different views of those stories are both teaching morally good uh ideas, right? Because
Right.
it's very conflicted, but the story, it's the same story, and we're taking very different things from it from very different perspectives,
Mhm.
but we're arriving at the same, relatively the same moral foundations, because there is a lot in common in terms of social justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's where I come to my biggest message that I put out there. Anytime somebody comes to me and says they want to learn with me or they want to become Jewish or anything like that, one of the first things I say to them, well, actually, one of the first things I say is, no, you don't want to become Jewish because everybody hates us. Uh, but after that, I say, and this is my personal belief, is that there is no truth with a capital T. There is no one truth. There are truths, and there is your truth, but I don't believe that there is the truth, that there is one truth. And I've said to people, like, if you've come to me to get the truth, then you're coming to the wrong place. And not only that, but so there was a woman years ago who came to one of my Torah studies, and she said, I grew up Christian, and then I realized that wasn't the truth. And then I became a Messianic Jew. That's like people who usually like adopt Jewish practices, but believe in Jesus
Like
as their savior.
Jews for Jesus. Yeah.
So yeah, technically those are two different things,
Oh, okay.
but people tend to think of that as the same thing. Technically, Jews for Jesus is an organization. Messianic Judaism is a theology,
Okay. Okay.
um, or a belief system. But she said, then I was a Messianic Jew, and then I realized that wasn't the truth. So now I'm here to study with you, Rabbi, because I'm ready to know the truth. And I said to her, I'm sorry, there is no truth. I cannot give you the truth, And furthermore, I said to her, anybody who tells you they have the truth is full of it.
Hmm. Yeah. No, so your job is
And
more.
she didn't come back, by the way.
Would it be fair to say that your job as a spiritual leader is more to help people find their own truths?
Yeah.
Than,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I tell people, like, I'm not here to tell you what kind of Jew to be. I'm telling you to be your own Jew, or I'm not telling you how to be a good person, but just that you must be a good person.
Hmm.
Because that's a big part of Reform Judaism, is that we are not waiting for the Messiah. Like, it'd be great if a Messiah shows up, great. We're not waiting for, as Reform Jews, we're not waiting for the Messiah or a Messiah to come and fix the world and make the world a better place. We believe that we have to work together as humans, and I know, and I think that that's another similarity between at least Reform Judaism and, like, the Satanic Temple, is celebration of humans and our power as humans. That like, there's a book that is called "There's No Messiah and You're It." So, meaning, like, it's up to us to work together to bring about what we want to see, to be the change we want to see, right? To, like, see, we need to work together to create the peace and harmony on earth. And if a Messiah shows up and says, like, hey, great guys, you did it, like, good job, like, fine. But Reform Jews specifically are not, like the official stance of the Reform movement is that we're not just waiting for the Messiah to show up and do things for us.
Right. Yeah, it's always my I'm atheistic, but uh in my head there's this kind of, well, if there is a God, then you would think they would have given us all the tools to bring about this promised utopia on our own anyway. Like
Mhm.
it'd be like akin to you know, in terms of a Messiah coming, it would be something like, clean the house before Dad gets home.
Right. As opposed to, like, let's dirty the house as much as possible so that the cleaner will have no choice but to show up and clean it for us before
Right.
dad comes home.
Yeah, which it seems not the right way to do it, if you ask
Right.
me. So,
Right.
so what kind of social justice actions does your faith tradition engage in? Like, is there like a works component or?
Well, there's definitely, so the Reform Judaism has actually, like, a political action wing called the Religious Action Center, that works on lobbying of the government and political advocacy for issues, like all sorts of issues, like gun control laws, fighting for LGBT rights, fighting for abortion access, and female health care, um, fighting for economic justice. So the reform, I've heard somebody even say that, like, they consider the reform movement of Judaism to be like a political movement. I don't agree with that. I don't totally agree with that. There's definitely a theological component to it as well. But you know, on top of that, there's a difference between social action and social justice. Social action, I would define as, like, doing a coat drive or something, something like that, that's, like, important to do, right? You need to be doing stuff like that on, like, a local level, even.
Mhm.
Like doing a drive, um, you know, working at a soup or volunteering at a soup kitchen or a shelter or something like that, right? That's social action, and that's very important. And then social justice is usually thought of it, at least within reform movement circles. Social justice then is trying to create political change. Um,
Yeah, lobbying for legislation that protects people's
right,
rights and.
right. And that's where I think, that's what attracted me, to seeing what um, the Satanic Temple. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The Satanic Temple.
Mhm.
So that's what's attracted me to seeing what the Satanic Temple has been doing is, so I know that, for instance, I know that um, after the overturning of Roe versus Wade, I know that, if I'm correct, that the Satanic Temple was part of lawsuits um, after that.
Um,
I don't
well,
want to comment if I'm not right on that.
so Satanic Temple reproductive rights lawsuits have generally focused around, at pre the Dobbs decision, focused around people seeking abortion access and being denied that access in for one reason or another, and suing individual states for that right to access. Like they had one in Oklahoma, and I think one in, it wasn't Michigan, Missouri. There was one in Missouri too. Uh, as far as like public outreach stuff, like you mentioned coat drives. Uh, a lot of chapters do homeless collection stuff. There's a Menstruating with Satan campaign where they collect uh, female hygiene products for you know
I love that. I love that title. Yeah.
yeah. Well, that one's interesting because it doing the research, that's one thing that is not particularly donated with your regular. People don't
Mhm.
think about donating tampons and pads and stuff like that.
Right.
So when we did one out here in Arizona, the first year we started doing those, and we got like, half a storage unit full, and partnered with YWCA to give them to them, and so
Mhm.
they could distribute them. And then we ended up partnering with another group where what she did is she would pack little period packs and give them to the uh, high schools and or junior highs and high schools
Mm.
for underprivileged girls who have their first period and don't know what to do, and
Right.
the teacher or the nurse can just be like, here's your starter kit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of good stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to mention Jewish groups also, after the Dobbs decision. Jewish groups also um, protested and joined lawsuits,
Yeah, I recall.
especially because um, it's clear that the the push against abortion access comes from a theologically Christian idea,
Hmm.
and that is different from the Jewish idea that, and if it's okay, I'll go into that
Sure,
for a
sure.
second, which is, so the Jewish idea about abortion, first and foremost, is that if the mother's life is in danger, you save the mother's life, especially if that unfortunately means to have to terminate the pregnancy. You save the mother's life. Um, in Judaism, according to like Jewish tradition and Jewish law dating back, like this is like centuries or even millennia,
Mm.
because that's how old, all of our traditions go. Um, the Jewish definition would say that uh, for the first 40 days of a pregnancy anyway, a fetus is considered to be no different than any other bodily fluid, even in a woman's body. Um, After that, up until birth, the fetus is considered to be like a limb of the mother's body.
Hmm.
So that if the mother's life is in danger, if for some reason you need to, and the reform movement extended that to not just physical well-being of the mother, but mental well-being as well. So let's say this woman is a victim of incest or rape, right? And having to give birth to that child causes that that trauma,
Mhm.
right? That harm. Then Jewish law permits terminating that pregnancy, especially because in Jewish tradition, the soul, however one defines the soul, like that which makes you alive and your own being, is completely connected to your breath. And so in Jewish tradition, um, a human does not gain their soul until they draw their first breath, i.e., coming out of the mother's body.
Right.
And so that is very different from the clearly Christian idea that life begins at conception, right?
I find uh, the American religious rights argument that they say life begins at conception a bit uh, particularly hypocritical with regards to uh, all the other political issues that we find ourselves dealing with, because it seems to me that they say life begins at conception when we're talking about a baby, like they say a fetus needs to be treated like a person, but when it comes to someone who isn't American, it seems like they want life to begin at a social security number.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and look, I'm not an expert on Christianity. Okay. I just want to say that. But as far as I understand, the reason that idea exists in Christianity, that life begins at conception, has to do with the ancient argument of when Jesus became divine or gained divinity.
Mm,
And that a very ancient argument had to do an ancient argument in Christianity, and I could be wrong about this.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
From what I understand, is that in a more ancient time, there was debate about when Jesus became divine. That he wasn't necessarily born divine, that maybe it happened when he was baptized by John the Baptist. But then it was pushed earlier to it was when he was born. But then it was pushed even earlier to, well, no, he was divine from the moment he was conceived. And so if Jesus' divinity began at conception, then the Christian idea must be that life begins at conception. As far as I understand, that's where that comes from. And again, I'm not an expert on Christianity, but you can see though how, Jews, at least I don't even want to say theistic Jews, but Jews who, even atheistic Jews or non-theistic Jews, uh, still have a culture, that defines us as a people. But definitely according to Jewish tradition and Jewish law, the banning of abortion, you know, uh, uh, of any kind, even to conception, has nothing to do with anything Jewish, and clearly has everything to do with Christianity. And there is where we have this uh bleeding over between church and state, and that's where we are leaning toward being a theocracy and a Christian nationalist state.
I wonder where we go from there.
Yeah.
I mean, because I tend to think of things as very uh, structural, because I do tend to think of also tend to think of everything as okay, it's all stories and there's supposed to be moral teachings there, but those stories don't necessarily reflect the truth of uh, why that rule should be a rule. And it seems like one of the ones that always comes to mind with Judaism in particular is kosher diet stuff. Like
Mhm.
I I don't know what the religious justifications for not eating pork are, but I suspect that at some point there was a trichinosis outbreak, and the religious leaders said, "But don't eat the pigs." God
Yeah.
said, because they make you dead.
Yeah. So I mean, so yeah, there's some laws that are given that Jews say, like, we're given the reason why we have that law. And then there's some laws we're given where it's like we purposely, or not purposely, just we don't have a reason why we do that, and we just have to do that. I mean, modern Jews, especially like progressive Jews, will often continue to interpret these laws for our generation and say, like, you know, I don't know if there's a good reason not to eat pork, but let's say in addition to keeping kosher, or in place of keeping like some sort of a traditional way of keeping kosher, I might practice what's called like eco kashrut, where it's like, was this food grown in a good way for the environment?
Sure.
Or ethical kashrut, right? Was this food
Or
raised,
even
grown
even
ethically?
just as a practice of mindfulness, where the rule itself is relatively arbitrary, but I've decided to follow this rule, so I'm going to follow
Yes.
it.
Yes. And I would say a huge part of Judaism is mindfulness. Like turning what would otherwise be a mundane, normal act into a special holy act. And let me take a moment to define holiness as I see holiness, because
Sure.
holiness and unholy, like that comes up a lot both in Judaism and
Yeah,
in
definitely
Satanism,
in Satan.
respectively,
Yeah.
right? Right. So the way I've defined holiness, because this is one of those words like holiness and blessing, like these are words that religious people tend to say a lot and don't define, like, what does that mean? So the way I've defined holiness is, um picture you go to like Crate and Barrel and you find a beautiful vase there. I don't know if they sell vases at Crate and Barrel. I don't know. Do they?
I've never been in a crate and barrel.
All right. I would say Pier 1, but I think those are all closed. But let's say you go into a Crate and Barrel, you buy a beautiful vase, and it's the most beautiful one you've ever seen. You take it home, and let's say that vase breaks. You'd be sad, but you'd go back and get another vase. Now, let's say instead you've inherited a vase from like your great grandmother, and it's nothing special. It doesn't look like anything special, at least. But if anything happened to that vase, you would be absolutely devastated.
Hmm.
And to me, that is the definition of holiness. That vase to you is holy. And so, with Judaism being a lot about mindfulness, it's about, in a large way, like the practices that we do, a lot of it is about turning what would otherwise just be a mundane activity, like washing your hands or eating food or celebrating a day or something like that, turning that into a holy moment. You're saying this is a special, holy time that is special to me, dear to me. And so I'm doing something to mark that.
Hmm.
That's a big part of like why Jews do what Jews do, at least
Well,
religious Jews.
in that vein, I think a large portion, in terms of the way I think about uh, unholiness in a satanic context, is more of again, I'm atheistic. I don't have any the theological underpinnings here, but in terms of the way I think of the stories and what the Satan Lucifer character amounts to is kind of a not a check on God, but more of a it's Satan's job to keep God honest.
Yeah, and that exists in Judaism, by the way. So Judaism does not believe in Satan or the
No,
devil
yeah, it's just the adversary.
like Christianity does. Yeah. But definitely, I mean, Satan does show up at least in like Job. And I mean, Satan does show up sometimes. And what you just said is the Jewish definition of like Satan would be like somebody who like plays devil's advocate,
Yeah.
and just says to God, like, you sure about this? Like, you sure?
There was a Muslim hadith I found once that was a retelling of Abraham and Ishmael, where the devil makes an appearance as a character, and I found it fascinating because in that telling, the devil's job in that story was to run around going, "Don't kill your kid. Don't do it," which I thought was
Yeah.
a fascinating, like, in my read of that, Satan was being the good guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's actually, I don't know if you're aware of this or not. I mean, there's a lot of, well, you're probably aware of this. There's a lot of angelology and demonology in Judaism. A lot of angels and demons in Judaism. And not only that, even though there's no like the devil, there in Jewish mythology, I'd say, there is the idea of like the prince of demons, and demons in Judaism are not, again, not a Christian scholar, but as far as I understand, demons in Judaism are not the pure evil entities that they are in Christianity.
Mhm.
Um, uh, in fact, there's an ancient tale, an ancient Jewish tale of a man who finds himself in the land of demons, like just a kind of a place on earth, kind of, and knows he's in demons, but finds a synagogue, like a Jewish place of worship,
Mhm.
goes in there, and he's like, "Oh my God, it's a synagogue!" But then the shamus, the like cleaner, like the janitor kind of guy, comes in and he's like, "Oh my God, a human!" And he's like, "Get down! The demons are about to come in. They're about to do a service." And so he's hiding while these demons come in and they pray to God like Jews do. Like they did a Jewish prayer service until one demon is like, "I smell man flesh," like that. Um, but so like demons play a different role. Now, I even happened to, my wife and I decided to even name our daughter after a demon.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, very
And
progressive.
that demon, and I'll tell you why, because that demon is Lilith.
Uh,
So Lilith, according to Jewish tradition, was the woman that was created in chapter 1 of Genesis. And that, because you have in chapter 1 of Genesis, you have man and woman were created together. And then in chapter 2, right? Not chapter 3, I believe chapter 2. Oh, I'm sorry if it's chapter 3. But after that, you have the idea of Eve being created from Adam's rib, which I could go into a whole other thing about how that's a misreading of that, and that's not actually what happened. So Lilith, according to the Jewish tradition, she was that first woman that was created, and that she wanted to be equal or even dominant to Adam. And Adam didn't like that and said to God, like, "Hey God, can you give me another one? Can you give me another one? This one's defective." So Lilith flies out of the Garden of Eden. And she is so God's like, "Well, you can't do that." So God sends 3 angels to go after her. And they catch up to her and they say, "Hey, come back to the Garden of Eden. You can't leave. Come back, or for every day you don't come back, we're going to destroy 100 of your offspring." And so Lilith then becomes this wandering entity that really becomes like the seductress of, very pious rabbis, uh, um, but becomes kind of the seductress who lures men. How can I be? Do I have to be PG?
no, 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 no.
Okay. So I mean, she lures men to spill their seed, either through masturbation or, well, probably through masturbation, but to steal their seed, men's seed, so that she creates human demon hybrids from that.
Not unlike Sin and Death in Paradise Lost. How
Yes, leading you astray from like the light and trying to like
in
distract you.
in Milton, uh, Sin is Lucifer's daughter, and then Death is their incestuous offspring.
So in that you have like in that you have some sort of like hybrid, yeah. Um, so Lilith becomes really demonized by like the patriarchal Jewish leadership over the thousands of years, that
Mhm.
Reform Jews and some modern Jews like are trying to like rework with that
Yeah,
thousands of years
because
of
in
patriarchy, right?
Satanic circles, Lilith is very much a big feminist icon.
And in Jewish circles as well nowadays too. Yeah, I mean, so much so that a major Jewish women's magazine is called Lilith,
Hmm.
named for Lilith. And so yeah, so Lilith, in especially in Reform Judaism, being a place where women, especially, so like my sister is a rabbi. My mother was a cantor, which is like a rabbi but in charge of like the song and prayer. I mean, the song when we're worshiping. Um, that was not allowed before like 40, 50 years ago. It was only men. So Reform Judaism and Conservative Judaism um, have been the pioneers in being spaces that women have Jewish voices and leadership. And so Lilith has become a strong symbol for feminism and strong women. And thus, my wife and I named our daughter, at least her Hebrew name, because American Jews, at least, we get our regular English names, and then you get a name amongst the people of Israel.
Mhm.
Uh, her Hebrew name, her name amongst the people of Israel is Lilith.
Well,
Lilith.
that is fascinating. We are actually over time at this point.
Okay.
Uh, but this has been a fascinating discussion. I really appreciate it. We might have to have you back on and revisit some more of this
Oh
at
my God,
some
I would
point, because
love
I'm sure
to.
there's a lot more that we could get into if we had some more time.
I would love to. Yeah, you let me know when. I'm very excited because I the number one thing is for people to just be a good people, and if we're all fighting to try to make this world a better place for us and for everybody else, that's the most important thing.
Okay, well, Adam Bellows, thank you so much for coming on to talk to me. I really appreciate it. Is there anything you want, like where should people go if they want to find out more about uh, Reform Judaism and what
So if you
doing?
want to find out about Reform Judaism specifically, visit reformjudaism.org. Um, I would say if you want to learn about Judaism from like a non biased way where it's not denominational, I'd say visit myjewishlearning.com. And then if somebody's interested in learning about maybe um, Judaism from like a biblical scholarship way or an archaeological way, thetorah.com is much more scientifically minded. If you want to explore maybe the Jewish challenges that the first Jews living off planet might face, which is what I apparently am the world leading expert on this topic. It was my rabbinical thesis. You can find me on an article on Sinai and synapses.org, I believe it is, or .com. And you can find me, or just find me on Facebook.
And if any of it, because Satanic congregation, TST congregations, anyway, are very kind of self-sufficient little clusters in various towns and cities, and if they wanted to reach out to any kind of local reform group to see if they wanted to do some kind of you know outreach or campaign together, what would they look for? Like, what would
Uh,
they find
you
their
you
local
would
Reform Judaism?
if you yeah, if you look up well, I believe if you visit reformjudaism.org, there's listings of reform congregations around the country.
Okay.
But if you look up the website of a local congregation, usually like on the main page, it would say like reform or conservative. So if you see that, definitely if you see like a picture on their website of like a woman wearing a yarmulke, like a kippah, like a skull cap or head covering,
Mhm.
um, that's definitely either reform or conservative. And a reform congregation is most certainly welcoming of the queer community, LGBTQ folk, and will be very welcoming.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you so much again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for having me.